We like to think there is this core of human nature that good people can't do bad things and that good people will dominate over bad situations. In fact, one way to look at the Stanford Prison Study is that we put good people in an evil place, and we saw who won. Well, the sad message is, in this case, the evil place won over the good people.
Did I just hear that right? Did Philip Zimbardo just claim his findings in the Stanford prison experiment were valid? This will be fun.
The APA defines basic ethical principles as psychologists safeguarding the welfare and rights of those with whom they interact professionally and other affected persons, and the welfare of animal subjects of research. When conflicts occur among psychologists' obligations or concerns, they attempt to resolve these conflicts in a responsible fashion that avoids or minimizes harm. Because psychologists' scientific and professional judgments and actions may affect the lives of others, they are organizational or political factors that might lead to misuse of their influence. Psychologists strive to be aware of the possible effect of their own physical and mental health on their ability to help those with whom they work. Psychologists establish relationships of trust with those with whom they work. They are aware of their professional and scientific responsibilities to society and to the specific communities in which they work. Psychologists uphold professional standards of conduct, clarify their professional roles and obligations, accept appropriate responsibility for their behavior, and seek to manage conflicts of interest that could lead to exploitation or harm.
Damn it! Fucked up! You don't know, I mean, God! I mean, Jesus Christ, I'm burning up inside, don't you know? I just fucking can't take it.
Specific ethical principles defined by the APA urge researchers to obtain potential participants informed consent, protect them from physical or emotional harm and discomfort, keep information about individual participants confidential, and fully debrief people on the experiment. He or she should create an experiment. An experiment involves certain characteristics that need to be present. These characteristics include the independent variables, the dependent variable, experimental groups, and control groups. The independent variable is applied to the experimental group, while the control group gets no treatment and is used to compare the changes that the experimental group demonstrates. Confounding variables, however, are undefined variables that can affect an experiment but are not wanted. When conducting an experiment, the psychologist should be sure to not unfairly influence the outcome of the experiment because, one, it is unethical and wrong, but also because the findings of certain psychology experiments can be used to teach others about how people think. The Stanford Prison Experiment is a study of the psychological effects of becoming a prisoner or a prison guard. The experiment was conducted at Stanford University on August 14th through the 20th, 1971, by a team of researchers led by psychology professor Philip Zimbardo using college students. This is one of the most famous experiments ever conducted, as it is still talked about in almost every psychology class around the country. A movie was made loosely following the events of the study that was released in 2015.
Zimbardo did not have an independent variable within his experiment, which is a fundamental part of research in general. When participants asked to exit the experiment, they were denied by Zimbardo and his associates. Sexual harassment occurred within the experiment, but Zimbardo did nothing to stop it, violating Code 3.02 of the APA. Throughout the experiment, participants were unfairly harassed while they were beaten, dehumanized, verbally assaulted, and much more, violating Code 3.03. Zimbardo also did nothing to prevent such harm to his participants, violating Code 8.04 of the APA. Not only did Zimbardo deceive his participants that his experiment would cause harm and severe emotional distress, he also did not inform them that his experimental method was flawed and did not include an independent variable, violating Code 8.07. After such mayhem, Zimbardo released all of his participants with no further discussion or any debriefing, leaving them in completely distraught, disheveled, violating Code 8.08.
The Milgram experiment on obedience to authority figures was a series of social psychology experiments conducted by Yale University psychologist Stanley Milgram. They measured the willingness of study participants, men from a diverse range of occupations with varying levels of education, to obey an authority figure who instructed them to perform acts conflicting with their personal conscience. Participants were led to believe that they were assisting an unrelated experiment in which they had to administer electric shocks to a learner. These fake electric shocks gradually increased to levels that would have been fatal had they been real.
Milgram did not let participants leave the grounds where the experiment was being taken place when asked to. In addition to this, Milgram deceived his participants in a harmful manner. His experiment was to test people's obedience to authority figures, but when the participants demonstrated reluctance and defiance to the experimenter made them continue anyway. In these regards, it is completely illogical to conclude that over 60% of his participants obeyed authority figures. His concluding results are flawed because there was a confounding variable of opinion that Milgram used to judge whether or not his participants, quote-unquote, obeyed.
You can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man, there. You hear him hollering?
As I said before, the shocks may be painful, but they're not dangerous.
They're hollering. He can't stand it. What if something happens to him?
The experiment requires that you continue, teacher.
Yeah, but I'm not going to get that man sick in there. I mean, he's hollering in there. You know what I mean?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we must go on until he's learned all the word pairs.
I refuse to take the responsibility of getting hurt in there.
These experiments specifically hold great significance in modern psychology. Both being extremely controversial, they acted as an outline for new APA ethical rules and principles. These experiments and the concepts they brought to society are now taught in almost all psychology classes as examples of what not to do when acting upon psychological research. From these two experiments, we can better conclude how to safely and most effectively perform research.